Hello, everybody. Welcome to Parenting Against the Grain. This is our little weekly live video where we talk about different parenting topics. If you're new to the group, welcome. I have not actually been live in a week or two, so you haven't missed much in terms of that. I hope you're enjoying the posts and getting some good parenting support in this group. I'm hoping that in the new year we can liven up the discussion a little bit and have some really good chatting going on in the group. So with the holidays coming up, I thought it would be a good time to talk about parenting during the holidays. Regardless of what holiday you celebrate this time of year, I think when you have kids along, you just never know how these big holiday events are going to go. I think we've all had this happen where you go to a party or some big family gathering and kids just act unexpectedly. What can you say? So I've learned a few tips over the years that have helped me. And if people come on live and want to chime in with things that have worked for them, that would be awesome. Because I know I think we all struggle with this at times, especially if you have young kids, toddlers, but even sometimes older kids, just the excitement of holiday events and everything that's going on, the amount of sugar and just everything can really contribute to some unexpected behavior. Okay, so let's get started here. The first tip that I wanted to share was something I call the pre-event debriefing. So this is just a funny expression for saying, talk to your kids beforehand about what the expectations are for the event. And so I've started doing this a few years ago, and I still do it. Even though my kids are older, they're 10 and 6, I still do this almost every time we go to a big birthday party or a big holiday gathering, because I just want to remind them what the expectations are. And it's not always a bad thing, like what the expectations are. But so for example, you're at the event, someone's house, or someone's coming over to your house before people arrive. I think it's good to sit down either in the car if you're at somebody else's house, or sit down at a quiet moment before everybody gets to your house and just talk to the kids about what's going to happen. We're going to be getting together with so-and-so, and these people are coming over, or we're going to their house. This is what we're going to do. If there's something exciting happening at some time during the night, like opening gifts or, some big thing like that kids would look forward to, I think it's always helpful to tell them in advance when that's going to happen. Like, we're going to open gifts after dinner. We're going to open gifts, after Uncle John, whatever, sings a song. Okay, so that they have in mind a timeline, because otherwise the temptation for them is to ask you every 5 seconds when this exciting thing is going to happen, right? And so burdensome if they're asking you every 5 minutes, when are we going to open gifts, or whatever the big event is. So if you tell them in advance, this is the timeline, I think that's a lot of times helps. Now, little kids, toddlers, sometimes, they still may ask, but I think it does help to have the timeline in mind. But also the kind of rules and regulations, that stuff is good to go over to. What kind of things do you expect them to do? Like, is there going to be a big meal and you want them to sit at the table the whole time? Use proper dinner manners. Is there some other expectations of things that you do or do not want them to do? It could be whatever, whatever is your value set. But I always like to go over those things in advance, because the kids are a little calmer than when they actually get there. And just to remember, we don't do this. If you don't want them going upstairs or going to a certain part of the house, you can go over all that with them. This has been probably one of the best things I've learned over the years. And I do this for everything. Before we go into church, before we go into a big party, before we go into a big, school presentation, like these are the expectations. And it doesn't always work perfectly, but it does help. Because when you're in the moment, it's hard to kind of pull your kid aside and go over all that stuff as it's happening. And sometimes they're kind of wound up. And so I think this is really helpful. And it's also helpful in terms of, behavior. I mean, I often go over with my kids, how do we act when it's time to leave? Because the temptation is, especially when they're young, is to throw a tantrum when it's time to leave and they don't want to leave. So if you remind them in advance, like when it's time to leave, we don't have to throw a fit. We can just say goodbye. And sometimes they still throw a fit, but going over it in advance sometimes helps. Okay, so number one, pre-event debriefing. Number two, this actually comes from a person in the group, and I thought this was so good, I want to share it. Amber shared that she has a code word that she uses with her kids when they're at like some big event, and the child just has to say the code word to her, and then that is their code for knowing I'm getting overwhelmed or I'm getting upset or something happened and I need to go see you and like be in a quiet space together and talk it over. I think this is such a great idea because it prevents, like possibly a lot of whining and complaining if something happens. It gives kids like a safe out so that they don't, have to feel like they're interrupting the grown-ups. They can just kind of tug on your arm and say the code word and then it's not a big deal, right? They don't have to make a, like feel embarrassed if they need help, or even if it's just like they need to go to the bathroom and they need help. It could be anything like that where they don't want to say it in front of a whole bunch of grown-ups. So this code word idea I think is really cool, and I think it could be really helpful, especially if you have kids who get overwhelmed by social situations easily. This could be great because no kid wants to say out loud like I'm feeling overwhelmed, and sometimes they don't even have the words for that. But if you just have this code word, then they don't have to worry about that. So thank you, Amber. That was a great, really great idea. Okay, number three, for dealing with holiday gatherings and holiday parenting, is consider your child's temperament. Now, you guys, if you have been in this group for a while, you know that I talk about temperament a lot, and it's for reasons like this because you go to some big event or some gathering, and if your kid acts in a way that others perceive as disrespectful or breaking the rules or whatever, and it's just their temperament that's driving this, then you can hopefully stay a little calmer and try to explain the situation or just handle it a little bit better. Because I know we've all been in that situation where our kid is doing something that we know others are judging us for or judging them about, but that we know there's like a deeper meaning to it or a deeper reason for it. So, for example, if your child's temperament is more introverted and shy, and these social situations can be very overwhelming to them, that is good to keep in mind as you go into it. Now, it's not always that you can avoid all these social situations, but you can maybe prep your child in advance that there's going to be a lot of people. It might be noisy, and maybe you can help them find like a quiet room that if they need to go to, or again, the code word that they could maybe step outside with you or something like that. Anything you can do to kind of consider their temperament, I think helps. If they're more extroverted, my kids are extroverted. We have the opposite problem. They love social situations. They love hanging out with their friends. The problem we sometimes have is either they don't want to leave because they're having such a good time, or when we do leave, they have the like post-event extrovert meltdown where they're just like, they had so much fun and they loved all that, but then they go back to this quiet space of the car and they just like can't handle it because all the social interaction just went away instantly. So it could happen either way. Introverted, extroverted, sensitive, they all have their potentially challenges and benefits to social gatherings and holiday events. And so knowing your child's temperament, thinking about how that might play out in a social situation, and kind of prepping them or at least considering their feelings can really help. Okay, the fourth idea, and this is just for parenting in general, but I think this really comes into play with the holidays, is try to have age-appropriate expectations for your child's behavior and responses to things. So this is especially true, I think, of toddlers. I think sometimes, maybe the older generation, grandparents, I think sometimes have an expectation for children's behavior that we know is not really age appropriate, but the expectation is there. So, but what we can do as parents is we know what our kids can handle, and we should know usually what is age appropriate for them at a given stage, more or less. So, for example, if you have a toddler and you're having a nice family meal with fancy china and glasses, you know, for my personal kids, I know when they were toddlers that would have been a no-go, right? Because to me, age appropriate expectations means they will probably break a dish or something will tip over and spill. So trying to set up the environment so they can win, look at it like try to have an environment where it makes it possible for them to be, successful. And so if you're going over to someone's house and you don't know what the environment's going to be like, especially with toddlers, are there going to be things that they could break? Um, if you can talk to the host beforehand, if that's possible, or if there's maybe like a room that they could be in that doesn't have as many breakable things, or just consider all these factors. It's really hard sometimes when you go to someone else's house because you don't know what's going to be there. But anything you can do to have age appropriate expectations, you can't go to a gathering at 9 o'clock at night and expect a toddler generally to do great because it's probably past their bedtime. They're not going to respond well. Things like that. I think most of us have that in mind. It's pretty much common sense. But sometimes when there's other adults in the mix that may have different expectations, then that kind of throws things off for us. But just kind of trying to understand that, trying to set our kids up for success, I think that helps. Number 5, the issue of gratitude often comes up during the holidays when there's gift giving. And, you've probably seen these videos and memes floating around Facebook about whether or not we should, encourage our kids to say thank you for gifts and how we should do that. And, everybody has their own opinion about how we try to foster gratitude with our kids. The old standard thing is like when your kid gets a gift and the parents always say, "What do you say?" And they say, "Thank you." And, the kids oftentimes, especially when they're very young, you can tell that thank you is not completely genuine, or maybe they don't even really understand, if they're very small, what they're saying. So maybe just think about that in advance. How do you want to handle the issue of gratitude and expressing gratitude? My personal opinion is I think it's okay to encourage them to say thank you for a gift, even little kids. And even though they may not completely understand what that means, I think it does establish sort of a habit of mind and a habit of speech that when we get something, we respond to the person who gave it to us. But at the same time, you don't want to be too forceful. I would not be too forceful about it, especially with very young kids, because, they don't completely understand what gratitude and, showing thanks really means. And so you can encourage that. I think it's nice if they and if you think they understand it and would be open to saying thank you to whoever gave them the gift. But and then as they mature, then the expectation will probably change. So my 10-year-old, of course, he understands a lot more about gratitude and what that means. And so he knows that even if he gets a gift that is not his favorite, or it's not the thing that he asked for or whatever, that he still says thank you. And and he doesn't make a big deal about it. He just says thank you. And, that's what we do in our house. And so you can think about with your kids how you want to handle the whole issue of gratitude. The other thing that often comes up in the holidays has to do with, showing affection to relatives and friends that you may not see very often. This comes up a lot with little kids because everybody wants to hug or hold the baby or the toddler. And sometimes they do not want that. So, think about maybe in advance before this big gathering, how you might want to handle that. I know a lot of people now are really encouraging kids to learn from an early age about personal consent. And I think that can be really important. So, whatever your values are around showing affection with hugs or, high fives or whatever. If your kid's old enough to talk about that with them, you can kind of go over that with them. I think the main point is, and I see this a lot with online with different posts and Facebook groups that I'm in, is I think we're coming to terms with the idea in parents of our generation that, we don't have to force our kids to hug anybody. And I think that in generations past, there was more expectation to, oh, you have to hug Uncle Johnny. We only see him once a year. And so I think most of us now in our generation are kind of understanding no kid needs to be forced to hug somebody that they don't know or that they don't really, and so maybe you can come up with some other ideas to say hello or just give a high five or a fist bump or something, whatever feels comfortable for your child and you. But it is good to kind of think about that in advance so that you don't get in that awkward situation where a distant relative or friend wants to hug or hold your child and you don't feel comfortable with that. And so maybe you can kind of try to plan in advance how this is going to happen if you can. It's hard, but and so the child doesn't feel awkward and uncomfortable either, because that can be really difficult, especially for kids who are introverted or kind of sensitive. It can be difficult for them to show affection in that way, especially to someone that they don't know. Okay, and lastly, number 7, this is a hard one. We've all been there, is try not to rush and plan for downtime. And this is hard. I mean, we've all been there. We're trying to get somewhere on time, and we're rushing out the door and, trying to get the kids to put their shoes on and all that. But I think as much as we can, try to slow things down, allow for plenty of mistakes and time, and so that kids have plenty of time to kind of work through the routine of what it takes to get ready. I mean, I know for most of us, if we're going to some big holiday event, sometimes it involves special clothes, or we fix our hair nicer, or the kids' hair nicer. All that takes extra time. So anything we can do to just plan ahead so that there's plenty of time to get all that stuff done, so we're not too rushed, because that stresses everyone out. And we've all been there, rushing out the door at the last minute. The other thing that really helps, I think, is to try to figure out some way to put some downtime into the schedule, whether it be a quiet time in the afternoon or letting them have some time to play with new toys, before we rush on to the next thing, or whatever that means for you, that allow the kids to have a little downtime. And of course, if you have very young kids, sometimes that's just nap time, if you can keep up the regular nap time schedule. But for older kids, I think it's just helpful for them to just have some time where they don't have to worry about expectations, where they can just play and be kids and not have to worry about, going to some next event or, something else that's kind of expected of them. And if they got new toys or new things to play with, it's always nice to have some time for them to, really experience that and not be rushed on to the next thing. So those are just a few tips that I have. I hope this was helpful. If anybody's watching later and has their own ideas, please put them in the comments, because like I said, Amber had such a great idea, and I know I'm sure some other of you have some really great ideas that have worked for you. So please put those in the comments, and I hope you guys are preparing for a wonderful holiday season and staying calm this time of year, and I will see you next time. Thanks.